Hello everybody, this is Fernando for the latest Aliens and UFOs video. Alright, let's go ahead and let's do another entry here. This one again based on one of your newer suggestions, and then this one seemingly a first within this series here. I don't quite recall an encounter quite like this being described in one of my past videos. Probably the closest one is I recall one of them where one of the witnesses, the person actually fought a little bit, but it was more like the aliens were fleeing and then the person went back at them and jumped on the UFO and then was holding on to it. That's the closest example, and even then that was a little fantastical. But here, this one actually has to do with an encounter involving attacks, straight on attacks between the aliens themselves and then the witnesses, and it was almost like a brawl. So again, a huge first associated with this, and it has to do with this. You're looking at it now. It's known as the Domsten Blobs Encounter. So let's go ahead and let's talk about all the fascinating but brief info associated with this encounter. So what was this Domsten Blobs encounter? Well, it was something that happened a couple of decades back, December 20th, 1958, to be specific, there in a place or a village called Domsten. Domsten is located in Sweden, and to this day, it actually remains, this is one of the most quote unquote celebrated cases within that area, and rightfully so, because after hearing all this information, you'll see how it's very unique. It's again one-off kind of thing. So here's what happened on that night around 3 a.m. or so. There were two gentlemen, one by the name of Stig Rydberg and then another one by the name of Hans Gustafsson. I don't know if they were just driving from one job to another or just basically driving from a party to home. Either way, though, they found themselves driving near that village, and then that's when, out of the blue, they saw this UFO. This UFO can be described as follows. It was about 5 meters or so in diameter, so not too large but not too small at the same time, and then about 1 meter high, so definitely shorter than what you would expect some of the other UFOs. And this UFO apparently was already on the ground, so it wasn't floating off anywhere. Maybe it was nearby the road itself, or maybe it was actually blocking the road as well. But either way, though, there it was resting on 3 legs, a tripod. And you have seen some encounters related to that as well, where the UFO is resting on some tiny legs. Other times it's just floating on midair. In this case, though, it's resting. They right off the bat noted, too, that this UFO seemed to be emanating some kind of light from within itself. So whatever this light was, though, it wasn't too bad. It wasn't blinding, but it was still definitely noticeable. And then right at the center of all this light, it seemed to have this darker core. Hard to tell, though, what this darker core consisted of. Was this maybe the device that was manipulating power within the UFO? Was this something else? Something else like a weapon of some sort? It's hard to tell because nothing else was ever really investigated on this encounter, and here's why. I don't know if these creatures just all of a sudden, these aliens just came out of the blue, but either way, though, these two men suddenly found themselves surrounded by this, and you're looking at those creatures there. There were a handful of them, apparently, at least either 2 of them or maybe a little bit more, but there they were surrounding them, and they were described as follows. They were about 4 feet or so tall. They had this grayish complex associated with them. They were about 2, maybe 1.5 to 2 feet wide. I'm guessing if you consider those appendages, as far as the closest thing involving arm-like appendages, like if they were stretched out. Either way, though, these things were completely featureless. There was nothing made out for them. You couldn't tell a face. You couldn't tell, let's say, arms or legs, stomach, anything like that, not even a mouth. All this stuff, it was just one broad shape, but still, based on what you're seeing, you can still make out at least where the head would be and then where the rest of the quote-unquote body would be as well. But the way the men described it is they were shaped like loaves, maybe like loaves that haven't been cut yet. They were just in their natural round shape, something along those lines. That's what these things were. Well, whatever they were, they definitely had an idea of what they were going to do, because they suddenly started to attack these two men. These things, whatever they were, around 3 or 4 of them, apparently, they started to grab and hold these two men. And this was right there, happening right there in the middle of the street. And it became a straight out brawl. In fact, one of the guys, Rydberg, stated this was almost like a fight to the death. These beings were grabbing them by their arms, grabbing them by their legs, trying to grab them by their stomach, almost like they were pulling them or trying to hold them and pull them straight into the UFO. Of course, the men had a different idea. They're not going to let that happen to them. And so they started fighting back. So much so that Rydberg stated, and this was his direct quote, that his arm plunged into the creature all the way up to the elbow, but it had no effect at all. Like the blow had no effect to whatever this alien was. So however this alien's body was, which it seemed like it was very soft, for lack of a better term, it was soft enough to be able to absorb his entire arm without anything like you would expect, like if a human were hit that hard. Instead, these things were easily able to take those punches, so to speak. And then also, they had almost like this weird, I don't know if it was some kind of sixth sense, closest analogy, but they were able to dodge many of the other attacks by these two men. These two men, again, were in an age where they could have a good fight. Like they were 30 years old, the other one was 24 years old. And so here they were doing a straight up brawl with these aliens. And yet these aliens were able to dodge them almost as if they could easily anticipate the thoughts of the men themselves and then know where these punches were going, almost like a spidey sense as well. You know how you've seen the movie where Spider-Man has this sense that suddenly comes into play and he's able to dodge so easily those punches. That's what it seemed like was happened here. Finally, after I guess a couple of minutes, but probably to them it felt like a much longer time, one of the men was able to break out, and then it suddenly went, the man went to his car, the car that they were coming from or that they got out of, and then he hit the horn. It must have been like a really, really loud horn, because all of a sudden these 3 or 4 aliens stopped. Like this horn, whatever the sound, loud sound was, to them was enough to just completely stop them cold. And so they went back into the UFO, and then they took off. In fact, the way it was described was that they fled at that point. So how about that? Punches don't seem to do anything. It seems like these aliens weren't scared of anything else, but a simple car horn definitely did the trick. And so once it took off, the men described it as emitting some kind of quote-unquote paralyzing vibrations, and that stopped these men from doing anything else, at least until the craft was out of sight. So very fascinating stuff. No, here you have an actual brawl between some things from outer space, and here you have 2 young men, and they were getting into the thick of it, and then all it took was just a car horn to stop whatever was happening. No other cars apparently came by to inspect things. It must just, it's 3 a.m, so they probably weren't expecting anything else. If they had, imagine that sight. If you were driving along that road and you happen to come across this, what would you do if all of a sudden you saw these 3 to 4 amorphous type beings fighting for control or fighting to abduct, for lack of a better term, these men into the UFO? Would you join the fight, or would you actually try to run away as well? One thing too to note, one last thing, these creatures, the way their movements were, as lightning quick as it was described as being fluid. So that would have been quite a sight to see as well. That reminded me of the Hospital Goblins, one of my earliest videos, very popular video too. Those creatures also had some kind of fluidity when it came to their movements. In fact, I'll include the link below if you haven't had a chance to see it. I know some of you have requested it in the past, so that way I have talked about it, and that way you'll be able to see it too. So what do you guys think about this encounter, this Domsten Blobs Encounter? Isn't it something else? I haven't heard of anything. If you know of any other encounter that's close to this, please post those comments below. But anyone there from that area in Sweden, there in Domsten themselves, maybe you happen to have local touch to it, like let's say, family members or someone else that happen to live there that knows of this case, again, considering how celebrated it is. If so, that'd be great to hear your comments as well. So, all right, everybody, thanks again as always. Take care. Bye.